We believe Ripple is the IMF disguised as a private company. This is part 3 of an ongoing series. We're going to jump right into it. Consider smashing that like. Let's take you over to...
After these messages, we'll be right back. Yeah.
How would you like to earn an extra $100, $200, or even $500 a day, even more than that? I have many friends that are earning money every single day trading futures on BTCC. It's a simple process, and even if you don't want to learn how to trade, you could follow a trader on the site and let him do the trading for you. Currently, I am following BlackRock, and no, it's not the Larry Fink BlackRock, that's just his name, but this gentleman has a win rate of 95.33%. His assets under management is a little over 96,000, so he has a lot to lose. Don't just follow the people that have very little to lose. Follow the ones that actually are consistently trading. This is currently full at the moment at 1,200 copy traders. So if you see this basically have an open slot, again, not financial advice, you may want to consider jumping into that. Here's why. As you also see, the last 7 days, his win rate is 100%. The last month, his win rate is 95.51%. And the last 3 months, he's doing about roughly 89%. Again, a lot of you guys want just a copy trader that you can basically follow. But again, don't set it and forget it. Learn copy trading. And again, I'm not trying to have any of you guys use your hard-earned money to lose anything. You don't know what you're doing? Don't jump into this, but there is money to be made, and don't use your nest egg for leverage trading. Use a separate portfolio. But I suggest learn how to trade. Earn you some extra money on BTCC. It's easy. You don't have to KYC, and you don't have to use a virtual private network VPN. This is a wonderful site. They've been around since 2011. Give them a shot. Also, when you earn that extra money, you can store that on your Decent wallet. The Decent wallet was not affected by the recent XRPL debacle, where the backdoor of many wallets was open and there was a breach. So Decent wallet was not affected by that. Decent wallet is as safe as you keep your seed phrase. It's a wonderful product, and you can get the discount by using the link. It's the only way to get the affiliate discount, and that is to use an affiliate link. So that link is popping up on the upper right side of your screen, and it is the one that you will use. You will also get free shipping. Pick you up a Decent wallet today. Secure your assets. If you don't have them stored in a wallet and sitting on an exchange, then you're at risk. So pick you one up today. Thank you. Chatham House's Document. Once again, big up to Jesse of Apex Crypto Consulting. If you're gonna be following me, you might as well be following him, because his channel is your alpha source. I really mean that. I don't say that lightly. This guy is literally the alpha goat, not alpha dog, alpha goat of research. Seriously, stop what you're doing. If you're driving through traffic, be safe. Maybe pull over and be safe, and go subscribe to his channel. Call to action to do that. You will not be disappointed with his research. Let's jump over to this and why it matters to you. So for one, let's full screen this and look what it says here. And if you want the reference, it comes from chathamhouse.org/2018 about how the IMF remains lender of last resort. Literally, we left you guys on the hook last video. And again, just a disclaimer, Jesse may very well chime in and interrupt, and I welcome it. It just helps with the flow. Jesse mentioned about this whole concept of 20 years. So it starts off in 1968, then 1988 with the economists, and again, shortly after that, David Schwartz with his patents and so on, distributed ledger technologies. And then again, fast forward another 20 years, Bitcoin white paper. Don't you find this interesting? You know, is Jesse, he needs to put on merch. Isn't that interesting, right? So
isn't that interesting?
It is. That should be your merch, my friend. But anyway, this has given rise over the last 20 years to regional swap systems. Think about these systems, guys. They're literally telling you guys some of this. Among emerging market economies such as the Shanghai initiatives and the BRICS contingent reserve arrangement. If anything, I think we should research more of these things. All right, we know about BRICS, but the contingent reserve arrangement, that's interesting. And look what it says here, which provide another line of defense. Members agree to offer swaps to partners in difficulty from their own reserves. their own reserves would be what? Maybe Federal Reserve System? Could be. But look what it says here. Which pulls their liquidity? Right, pulls their liquidity. What would they use as an answer to that? On-demand liquidity. That is Ripple's main product. That's their most significant product. Now look at this. But this depends on the shock not affecting all partners simultaneously. Regional financial arrangements also carry a risk of moral hazard. Countries may claim support too frequently, or the safety net may promote reckless economic policies. For this reason, Chiang Mai, for example, uses the IMF to monitor countries drawing on the facility. I actually want you to chime in on this part because, brother, the way I look at it is we are always paying attention to what countries are doing what. Which ones need more liquidity than others? A great example of that is like the countries that are in a crisis or crises. They have consistently in the past borrowed from other countries, and the country has to take on that debt to bail out that other country, and it's trillions of dollars in debt. I've had an example, I think last time was maybe 2020, give or take, and I've used this example a few times. You have, for example, like the Central Bank of Greece decides they want to borrow a lot from the Central Bank of South Korea. And in the process of doing so, these banks that borrow 10 plus trillion dollars, which means may seem crazy to us, but again, these countries do it. That's nothing for them. They get hit with $60 billion in those fees because of the old SWIFT system. Old SWIFT system said, well, we got to message each other. As we know, Greece uses, like, for example, I used to be part of a fraternity, right? It's like, the Greek text, and they're going to transcribe that across over to South Korean text characters, and it gets lost in translation and gets truncated. Now, finally, with MX, as we know, is ISO 222, that solves truncation. It solves the whole thing of, all that terminology getting garbled up. And now, as we know, time is money, so the banks don't want to. They were never incentivized before to move a lot of money, ever. The difference now is with this worldwide mandate, ISO 222, in November, I personally believe commerce and the big money will move like it's never, ever moved before in the history of mankind. Well, who's behind that? Who would be the solution? Ripple would totally be the solution. That in itself means, like you said, tokenizing the internet of value, going from Google of internet information to Ripple with the internet of value. People are still focusing on, that supply and not enough money in the world to make this happen. You have got to be kidding me. But again, I want to get some of your 2 cents before we share more, once again, from this article and some other sources that we have. There's just so much there.
Yeah, so every time we're seeing documents coming from these think tanks and so on, IMF and these different think tanks that are for the central bankers and so on, these strategy, global economy, every time these things they're mentioning is what Ripple fixes. So swap lines, defaults, liquidity, all these things Ripple fixes to the T. Okay, so I just want to read something real quick here to tell you who the Chatham House is. Okay, so Chatham House, formerly known as the Royal Institute of International Affairs, is a prominent think tank based in London, England. Oh, isn't that interesting? We talked about London before, the Corporation of London. Anyways, I won't go down the rabbit hole, but look into the Corporation of London, not London the city, but the Corporation of London. I would really encourage you guys to research that corporation. You want to know where the power lies. It's a prominent think tank based in London, England, focused on international affairs with a mission to help. Now, here they're gonna lie, okay? So, with a mission to help governments and societies build a sustainable, secure, prosperous, and just world. That's not true. It's not prosperous for the people, okay? It's prosperous for the central bankers and some other corporations, but it's not. Anyways, and just world. While it is highly influential and respected globally, ranked as the second most influential think tank by the University of Pennsylvania's Global Go-To Think Tank Index, it is not specifically a big think tank for central banks. It's a big think tank for the people who rule the world, the decision makers, let's say, in general. Okay, they're talking again on all these issues with swap lines and having to have like liquidity pools somehow, and like they were talking about issues about all these things which Ripple fixes. Okay, so So just that's all I want to add to that, basically, to what you read there. Everything they're saying, they're talking about there, and the issues, and like these are crucial things, but there's issues, ripple fixes. This is considered the second biggest think tank in the world.
Thank you for citing the whole thing of that history behind Chatham House, because again, that's also interesting as well. I know we say that a lot, isn't that interesting? But it is interesting. Pounding that home, that was crucial. So again, this whole thing about these 20-year gaps, don't you guys find this again interesting? I mean, even when we look at the curves of a market can blast off, and then, for example, where it tanks, it's kind of like what is referred to as a 20-year cycle. And I have some more information about that. I don't know if I do it with Jesse or in another deep dive on my own, but I do want to cite for you guys a little more emphasis on not so much about Bitcoin and 4-year cycles, but there's a thing called 20-year cycles, and I think that's another thing that is very important to get into, and why that is so crucial. So we pull up more information from Chatham House. I want you guys to see a little bit more about this. Okay, so we jump down to this. It says, finally, the accumulation of precautionary reserves by individual countries contributes to global imbalances and ties up national resources in relatively low performing assets. Of course, there's a history of this, and if you guys remember, it was either the first video or the last one. Jesse cited some things about what happened, especially when it comes to the Bretton Woods Agreement and all these things shortly after World War II. These challenges, like I say, is not new. Global financial safety has always been multifaceted. The IMF was designed in 1947. Think about that. 20-year gap, 1947 to roughly 1968. We had the whole thing of, like, in 1968, they were trying to solve some things with the ESDR, or special drawing rights, right, Jesse? I think you're wanting.
Yeah,
to chime in
so
here.
yeah, I just want to chime into a second. So here I think they're mistaken, because I'm pretty sure the IMF was created in 1945, which is I'm almost 100% sure of that. With 1945, the same day that the Bretton Woods Agreement was created. And so here they'll say the IMF was designed in 1947, but technically I think it's 1945 to be the sole. Put that back, please.
Well, just real
Okay.
quick, I want to show that you
Okay.
are technically right. So it
Yeah.
wasn't right after 1945. This is July 1944. You have June 6, 1944, is, we know, the invasion of Normandy, D-Day, and so on. So we're close, right? So it was
Yeah.
technically while World War II was going on. That's interesting in itself. Let's jump back to what we have here. Go
Yeah, I
ahead, take
think
it away.
the original creation is actually 1945 when they formalized it, but I'm not sure. But anyways, that's why I thought 1947 was off a bit. But anyways, so hear me out here. The IMF was designed 1947, which is technically 1945, to be the sole safety net to support the Bretton Woods pegged exchange rate system. But even at its origins, the conditions attached to borrowing from the fund deterred countries from using it. Instead, other arrangements such as European payment unions and sterling area offered a regional or currency-based mutual support, bilateral Federal Reserve swap, and so on and so forth. Right? As I explained in our other deep dive, they proposed a Bancor, which is exactly what the SDR technically. So in 1945, they proposed a Bancor, but the US dollar was chosen. Then in 1968, they created the SDR, which is technically kind of like exactly what the Bancor was, neutral bridge currency, but it didn't work. That's what they said in the first paragraph. They said that it was not adopted, okay? And that's what I explained in the last video. It didn't get global adoption because it didn't serve that liquidity. Not enough banks and countries started using it. And then in 1988, we see the Economist magazine article talking about new world reserve currency, how it would help with liquidity, cross-border, global trade, and it would help with the FX market. Exactly all the things that they're describing, all the issues there that they're describing. And the Economist magazine Rising Phoenix article talked about how the IMF would be the best institution to manage this new global reserve currency that they foresaw being adopted in 2018 because of new technologies. And because the IMF would be the best to manage this currency because of their experience with the special drawing rights, which is a joke because they weren't even successful with the special drawing rights. Always excuses for the IMF to literally control the main global reserve currency, or the liquidity layer for the world. Was I going to that? Something else I want to explain? Oh, yes. So that's Bretton Woods, the first Bretton Woods, but we'll go into that, Max, sometime soon. We'll talk about the Bretton Woods 2.0. The IMF has been calling for the Bretton Woods 2.0 for quite a long time now. For the past maybe 4, 5, 7 years, they're talking about a Bretton Woods 2.0. So the Bretton Woods 1.0, just so you guys know, was the US dollar, the global reserve currency, backed by gold. So it was backed by commodity. And now the IMF is calling for a Bretton Woods 2.0. Technically, this should be a new global reserve currency, maybe like a global stablecoin like we talked about, being backed by commodity. Maybe it's a bunch of commodities, maybe it's going to be backed by fiat currencies, debt instruments, whatever. But my point is, the IMF is now calling for a Bretton Woods 2.0. And the Bretton Woods 1.0 was a global reserve currency backed by gold. They're calling for Bretton Woods 2.0, which technically would be a new global reserve currency. Obviously, if it's following the same pattern as the Bretton Woods 1.0, new global reserve currency backed by something. Is it gold and silver and debt instruments or whatever? What is it backed by? Maybe, all the money. Just want to point out, IMF is calling for the Bretton Woods 2.0. Isn't that interesting?
I love it. Like I said, brother, you gotta get some merch for that. All right, so we're gonna jump back to this. I think this is a solid link from Chatham House. That may be off a tad bit, but it's okay. So if you think about it, okay, what about some of these countries? What about these countries that came out of World War II? So it says literally at the same time. Think about this: central banks of G10 economies, the United States, the United Kingdom, France, West Germany, Italy, Japan, Netherlands, Belgium, Sweden joined eventually by an 11th member, which is Switzerland. And what do we know about Switzerland? We know that the Bank for International Settlements is literally headquartered there. And they're going to reference that. They set up a multilateral swap network. Central bank governors negotiated these arrangements behind closed doors at the Bank for International Settlements, BIS, in Switzerland. They therefore avoided the political debate and stigma associated with IMF. In 1964, for example, the value of support available to the Bank of England from G10 central banks amounted to the equivalent of the full package of support for Mexico in the 1994 peso crisis, and it did include the IMF, the Bank for International Settlements, and the World Bank, and bilateral credits. I see you backstage just grinning, so I'm going to take it right over to you.
Yeah.
Take it
Yeah.
away.
Okay, so the Bank for International Settlements, I show a video in I show that many times actually in my videos. So the head of technology for the Bank for International Settlements talks about how, this is what he says: if we have a unified ledger, that it would be replacing Swift. So he says the unified ledger replaces Swift. Okay, so as I showed, I was the first one to actually show this because there was a lot of confusion in the community about this regulated liability network and shared ledger concept, unified ledger, Finternet. I mean, how does it tie into Ripple? And I show very clear proof using their own documents and their own words. I prove that the regulated liability network, the regulated settlement network, the shared ledger, the unified ledger, and the Finternet, it's all the XRP ledger. And because the regulated liability network was first called the Regulated Internet of Value in a city document in 2021, but they changed the name real quick because they knew that if they said the Internet of Value, the Regulated Internet of Value, everybody knows it's Ripple. But long story short, I proved that all these five are the same thing using their own documents. I proved that 100%. And because there's one document that says when the BIS refers to, when they talk about the regulated liability network, they call it the unified ledger. And then I have another document showing how the regulated liability network used to be called the regulated internet of value. And then Gilbert Verdian said we partnered with R3 that's bringing over the shared ledger. And then Tony McLaughlin of Citibank, that's always sitting on stage with Gilbert Verdian, he said the regulated liability network and the shared ledger are the exact same thing. And he says how if you take 25,000 banks and you merge them all into a shared ledger, that's what the regulated liability network is. Anyways, I prove very clearly using their own words, the shared ledger, regulated liability network, Finternet, unified ledger, Finternet, yes, it's all the same thing. The BIS that they're talking about here says I have the video, okay, maybe we should have showed that, but we didn't pull it up. I didn't know we were going to go this way. But so the head guy at the BIS for technology at the BIS says if we have the unified ledger, would be replacing Swift. Who replaces Swift? Who has been saying for 7, 8 years now, we're replacing Swift, we're replacing Swift, we're replacing Swift. Ripple is replacing Swift. And here we have the BIS admitting on video the unified ledger will replace Swift. And he specifically explains how with the unified ledger, you're no longer having to go through all these intermediaries and these corresponding banks to do the payment, which is exactly what Ripple fixes, right? Ripple has CEO of Ripple, Brad Garlinghouse, has explained very clearly that their solution replaces the corresponding banking system, which is you send a payment, it has to go through multiple banks. It takes 7 to 14 days to get there. You don't know where the payment is at. You have nostro vostro accounts. You have all this money trapped all over the world because you have to hold it in accounts globally. All the banks have to hold money globally to be able to settle those accounts, settle those transactions. So it's like 10 to $20 trillion of trapped capital, dormant capital. So anyways, so the head guy at the BIS literally explains to the T exactly how the unified ledger is going to replace the corresponding banking system, and it's going to help with this it describes everything Ripple does to the T, and it says the unified ledger will replace Swift. And we have Brad Garlinghouse, like I said, saying 100 times, and everybody at Ripple, we're replacing Swift. Everybody knows Ripple is replacing Swift. And like I said, I proved it another 6-7 different ways and 100 different angles that these are all the same thing. They're using different terminologies instead of saying the XRP ledger so that we can't figure out what it is. And again, this document here, everything they're describing, it's all what Ripple is fixing. They're talking about how they have to have pools and swap lines and so on and so forth, but it's all, this is what Ripple fixes. So isn't that interesting?
Absolutely. We're going to jump more into this thing about the swaps. Even on my channel, I don't know if I'll put an end screen card possibly. There's a video about institutional swaps. In fact, I remember which one that is. You'll see that as an end screen card. You're more than welcome to take a look at that because it holds a lot of weight with what we're talking about with these swaps. Let's take you over to this again. You see here, moreover, these swaps, since we're talking about, extended beyond the era of pegged exchange rates. The final multilateral safety net for sterling was arranged for, or by the BIS, in 1977 and was the first to be linked to IMF surveillance. The G10 central bank safety net allowed sterling to be gradually retired from its key currency role, but didn't prevent the collapse of the dollar-based exchange rate system. Wow. I mean, that's interesting. The safety net of the 1960s and 70s were also restricted to the club of richer industrialized economies. The rest of the world had to rely on the IMF with its attendant conditionally and loss of policy sovereignty, especially during the 1980s sovereign debt crisis and the 1990s emerging market financial crisis. The stigma of becoming dependent of the IMF led to the accumulation of huge foreign exchange reserves in the 2000s by many emerging market economies. That in itself is also worth pointing out. Now, let's get back to... Oh, go ahead.
I just want to add, sorry. So you see how they said that because they can't trust the IMF, they have to hold... No, go back to the document, please. Sorry, I want to point this. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. IMF. So the stigma of becoming... So first they say, with its attendant conditionality and loss of policy sovereignty, especially during the 1980s, sovereign debt crisis, and the 1990s emerged. So they're saying like when countries borrow from the IMF, there's these conditions that come along with it and they lose their sovereignty, which they don't want to do. And then it says the stigma of becoming dependent on the IMF led to the accumulation of huge foreign exchange reserves. So this, I think, is technically dormant capital that Brad Garlinghouse always talks about, right? They are not willing to borrow from the IMF, let's say, because nightmare. They have to accumulate huge foreign exchange reserves in the 2000s by many emerging market economies. So with Ripple, you don't have to use these. If they're referring to Nostro Vostro accounts, which I think is what they're referring to, a form of them anyways, you don't have to do that with Ripple because you just hold XRP or you just hold your own currency, because when you send a payment, it settles in 3 seconds. You don't have to hold dollars in the other country to help settle a transaction and guaranteeing that that transaction is good. You don't have to hold all these dormant currencies and huge amount of money globally, which is dormant capital, which they can't use. They're just... I wish I had more time to explain what that is. But anyways, that's what they're fixing here. Ripple fixes this right here. Because with Ripple, you just send the payment, settles in 2 or 3 seconds. You're not worried about the payment maybe not going through or payment not settling. So.
You know, you cut me off sometimes. I'm going to actually cut you off on this one.
Please do. Please do.
This is good. I'll pull this back up. Okay, just for a brief moment. Jesse mentioned the whole thing of obviously sovereign debt. I don't know if it's necessary. Yeah, there it is. Let's highlight that. So we have sovereign debt crisis. If you think about like Ripple with XRP is a sovereign debt instrument. We also know that we had references, myself, Jesse, documentation, Shot to Smoke, whoever we're networked with. We have highlighted numerous times about sovereign debt instruments and sovereign supranational, remember that? Sovereign supranational currencies. We think about, by definition, Ripple with XRP fits that need to the T.
Sorry, I'm going to cut you off again. So yeah,
no, it's all right. Go ahead.
The other deep dive we did, actually, we released, well, a few days ago. We showed a document coming from the IOSCO, which is the International Organization for Securities globally, along with the BIS and the Committee on Payments Markets Infrastructure, talking about a global reserve currency, a global stablecoin being used as a means of exchange. So for it to qualify as a global stablecoin, it had to be used as a means of exchange. So exactly what Stellar and Ripple XRP do. It describes Ripple to the T. This, my goodness, guys, you really want to watch that video. Max, maybe we should post it at the end here because that video is crazy. But anyways, it describes Ripple to the T, talking about being a global reserve, global stablecoin, and it says that this global stablecoin would be backed by a reserve fund. So all the different global financial institutions would be holding commodities or assets, including would be backed by debt instruments, sovereign debt instruments. So that's what it said. The global stablecoin would be backed by sovereign debt instruments and also currencies that are very liquid. And all the global financial institutions all over the world would be holding these. All of these collectively would be called the reserve fund. And this would be backing this new global reserve currency. And the value of all of these assets would be equal to all of the tokens that this private company would have issued as a global stablecoin. Okay, so it was very specific. Talked about a private. It described Ripple to the T. Okay, like you have to watch this video, guys. Max, let's post it at the end of the video. Let's try not to remember to. Let's try not to forget to post that video.
Now I'll include the one I was talking about earlier and the other one, so they'll give them a couple options about that. So
yeah, and sovereign debt is 150 trillion, just sovereign debt alone. And it was backing this new global stablecoin that a private company had created. It's describing Ripple to the T. But anyways, you have to watch that video.
Yeah, and that's just sovereign debt. I mean, like, I do this a lot of times on my channel where I point out key sectors of capturing some of that value and have it represented on chain. So we talk about sovereign debt. What about derivatives? I mean, I know a lot of times people talk about XDC like, oh man, derivatives is going to, really stand out. But again, these are all things like we're not even scratching the surface, technically speaking, of the full potential.
No. Derivatives is 4,000 trillion, I think. Corporate debt
is quadrillions. Yeah, literally, it's quadrillions.
Yeah, 4,000 trillion, like 4 quadrillion. I think it's what it's at now. Like I said, government sovereign debt, which is government debt, is like 150, maybe 175 trillion, I think. Corporate debt, I think, is like 300 trillion. Real estate might be 350 trillion, which they're tokenizing everything real estate. You've got stocks, bonds, derivative. We talked about derivatives already. The NASDAQ, which is owned by the New York Stock Exchange, and NASDAQ. New York Stock Exchange is owned by ICE, the International Continental something. Anyways, owned by ICE. That's about 72. It used to be 72 trillion. Maybe it's like 80 or 90 trillion now with inflation. Those right there is like 5,000 trillion, $5.54 trillion going in blockchain. And in the future, it might take 10, 15 years before it all gets there, maybe 20. But I think like from here to just 10 years from now, I think we'll have, I think at least half of it. Because 2 years ago, the World Economic Forum, which I actually despise, they said that I think it was 15% of the GDP of the world, 10 or 15% would be tokenized within a few years. And that was like 2-3 years ago. Anyways, it'll go pretty fast. They're tokenizing the world. That's what people need to understand. It's all going to blockchain. And when you want to go from one asset to the other, you need liquidity. And Stellar is going to portion of that, I believe. And Ripple is going to take a bigger portion, in my opinion. Yeah, it's the internet of value. And then Quant's going to help the whole world to basically connect the whole world to the blockchain and build multi-chain applications and so on. So that's another. Anyways, I don't want to go on a rant again on that one, but because the last video I went on like 10-minute rant trying to explain the difference between Quant and Ripple and XLR and all that stuff. But anyways.
Well, with that said, we'll close it out with that. There's another, this is an ongoing series. The code word, if you listen to the entire outline, is rant. And we'll know that you listen to
Jesse's rants. Jesse's rants. Or rant.
Just type in rant, or if you want to do that, that's fine too.
Apex rants, whatever you feel, whatever you feel like saying. Yeah, don't listen to Max. Just say whatever you want. Honestly, just don't listen to Max. He's always trying to bully. You got to do this. You got to do that. Just write whatever you want. I'm just kidding.
Well, in reality, none of this research matters because there's always at least one Yahoo in the comments to be like, XRP's not going to do nothing. Nothing at all. Not going to move.
I had the other one. Yeah, somebody in the comments the other day said, well, XRP's just a gas token. So, I mean, he's like, go do some research, buddy. I'm like, okay, all right, okay, buddy. I'm sorry. How do you see it as a gas token? Like,
it's all right. You can't win over everybody. There's people that when Christ existed didn't believe he was God either, so it is what it is. Anyway, you can lead a horse to water, right? Can't make it drink. Listen, we appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. And with that said, give Jesse a follow if you're on my platform, and even if you're on his platform, give
Yeah,
me a follow.
Max
That'd be
a
nice,
follow.
right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. So as the saying
Listen,
goes,
Max, I'm sorry, I want
yes,
to say something. I'm cutting him
yes,
off again.
sir.
You can lead a horse to water, we can't make it a drink. But if you've got the horse's head underneath the water, it should drink. You know, you have to drink. If you don't drink, you're gonna drown. Like, right? Like I feel sometimes we're talking about utility and stuff. We've got the horse's head underneath the water. You know, like drink. No, I'm just kidding. This is for entertainment purposes only. Anyway, so
Yeah, drink those ripple droplets, right? The
yeah.
drops. No pun
Sorry,
intended.
I
All
just had to
right,
clear it up.
we went a little further
No,
than
you're
we
bro.
should. Farther. Thank you so much, you guys. Take it easy. We'll see you guys in the next video. Over and out.
See you guys. Thank you. God bless.